Hello and welcome back to Koala Moon, a podcast of original children's bedtime stories and meditations designed to make bedtime a dream. Have you ever seen a unicorn for yourself? If you have, then you can count yourself as one of the fortunate ones. Unicorns are beautiful, magical animals that live in the heart of mystical lands, such as Sleepy Forest. Unicorns look just like horses, except they have a range of unique characteristics that set them apart from the horses we see in our countryside fields. For a start, unicorns are much bigger than the horses we see every day. Unicorns are so large and majestic that they can carry the likes of bears and lions around on their backs if they so wish. Unicorns love showing off how strong they are by giving lifts to other creatures. They are sort of like the personal taxis of the mystical kingdom. They can run at almost lightning speeds with their long, muscly legs and get to go wherever they need to be in next to no time. Unicorns do not have boring coats. In fact, unicorns come in all the colours of the rainbow. You might see a bright pink unicorn chatting to a sunny yellow unicorn whilst relaxing by a lake. Or you might even spot a midnight blue unicorn racing with an emerald green unicorn through the forest. Yep, unicorns really stand out from the crowd. Some unicorns have wings and can fly through the sky, but most of them remain on the ground. Their long tails can also come in all sorts of shimmering colours. The really lucky ones have multicoloured tails, but all are equally beautiful. But the main way that you can identify a unicorn from the rest of the four-legged animals of our world is by spotting their impressive horns. All unicorns have a long, majestic horn that pokes out of their forehead. A unicorn's magic is held within their horn, which is why their horns sparkle and shimmer with enchanted light. Unicorn horns can grow in all sorts of shapes and sizes. They start off being teeny tiny when a unicorn is born. But as they grow bigger and bigger, their horn grows bigger and bigger too. Some unicorns have twirly horns, some have straight and narrow ones, and others have horns that spiral and coil up into a point. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and colours too. Unicorns possess lots of magical powers. Along with their super speed and great strength, they provide good luck and fortune to everyone they meet. And they also have healing powers. If you fell over and scraped your knee, then a unicorn could magically make your knee as good as new again. Or if you had a bad cough, a unicorn could magically make it disappear. Because of their healing powers, the unicorns regularly travel around spreading their good luck and healing powers to as many people as possible. Unicorns are very special creatures. When a new child is born into the world becomes a better place. Children are full of so much love and magic that they make the sun shine that little bit brighter. The plants grow a little bit taller and make every living creature on the planet feel a little bit happier. So when Fenella the unicorn was born, the world became a better place just by her being in it. Fenella was born on a cool spring day on the outskirts of Sleepy Forest. Her parents were so excited to meet her for the first time, and they invited all of their friends to meet her in the meadow where they lived. Everybody gathered around to meet the newborn unicorn and waited for Fenella to be revealed. Fenella's mother proudly introduced her baby to the group. Fenella was adorable, and everybody sighed with adoration at the sight of her. Fenella's coat was a soft pink colour, and she had a long, shiny, glittering silver tail. Her horn was rainbow-coloured and twirled to a pointed tip just like ice cream on a cone. Fenella pranced about the feet of the towering grown-up unicorns excitedly. She hadn't seen so many of her kind before, and she was delighted to meet them all. "Isn't she a darling?" Althea, the purple unicorn, gushed, watching Fenella trot around. "Yes, she is," Noelani, the white unicorn, agreed, before adding, "But doesn't she seem a bit on the small side?" Fenella's mother was taken aback. She hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary about her newborn daughter. "She's a baby. Of course she's small," Fenella's mother defended her daughter. "She will grow up to be just as big as everybody else. Don't you worry." Baby Fenella gazed up at the tall and regal unicorns around her and smiled with glee. She couldn't wait to grow up and one day be as lofty and as impressive as everybody else. However, as the years passed, Fenella came to realize that things weren't going quite to plan. Instead of growing up to be large just like everybody else, Fenella was somehow remaining the same tiny size. She just didn't grow. While all the other children were getting taller every day, Fenella was staying the same miniature size. She was desperate to grow bigger so that she could carry out the same unicorn duties as everybody else. But due to her small size, she couldn't help out. She was too small to carry any of the forest animals on her back, and she was too slow to keep up with the other unicorns running their errands. She didn't possess enough healing magic within her to help out the large animals of Sleepy Forest, and she couldn't even pull the carts of fruit and supplies with the other unicorns because she wasn't strong enough. Fenella felt positively helpless. Fenella tried every way she could think of to make herself grow bigger. She ate extra portions at dinner. She did her stretches every day, and she wished on the stars every single night. But no matter how hard she wished or how much she tried, Fenella stayed the same tiny size. She was beginning to think that she wasn't destined to be a normal unicorn like everybody else. Fenella's mother didn't know what to do either. She tried feeding Fenella lots of vegetables to help her grow big and strong, but it didn't seem to be making much difference. She even tried using her healing powers on Fenella to help her bones grow bigger, but to no avail. It seemed that Fenella was destined to be a miniature unicorn forever. After years of trying and failing to grow bigger, Fenella and her mother decided that it was time to face the facts. Fenella was probably never going to be a large unicorn, so she had to accept herself for the pint-sized pony that she was. Fenella accepted this, but she was adamant that her small stature wouldn't hold her back any longer. She might not be able to do as much as the other unicorns, but she would do her best to keep up. One day, Fenella's friends, Zelda, Flynn, and Aslan, were heading toward Sleepy Forest to carry out their duties for the day. A tree that a family of birds lived in had fallen down in the middle of the forest. Zelda, Flynn, and Aslan had been instructed to push the tree back upright in time for nightfall, so that the birds could be back in their tree again in time for bed. Fenella followed her friends as they approached the entrance to Sleepy Forest at the edge of their meadow. For every long step that they took, Fenella had to take 4 tiny fast steps just to keep up. "Can I come with you and help?" Fenella pleaded with her friends. Zelda sighed and replied, "We would love for you to come, Fenella, but you won't be able to keep up with us. We only have a limited amount of time to fix the tree, and it's all the way in the middle of Sleepy Forest. We will have to run there, and you won't be able to keep up with us." Despite Zelda's rational explanation, Fenella was still determined to join her friends. "Please," Fenella begged. "I'll try and keep up, I promise. And if I can't keep up, then you can just go on without me. I won't be annoyed." Zelda, Flynn, and Aslan all looked at each other for support. They didn't want to leave their friend behind, but they also had an important task on their hoofs. Eventually, they gave in to Fenella's request. "Okay, Fenella, you can come with us," Flynn appeased her. "But we can't wait for you, so you'll have to keep up with our pace." Fenella leapt for joy. She was delighted to get to join her friends on a mission. Her rainbow horn began to gleam with bright, multicolored light. Her horn always did that when she was happy. "Okay then, let's go," Fenella commanded, leading the way into Sleepy Forest. At first, Fenella did well to keep up with her friends as they trotted off into the depths of the forest. She was lagging behind a little, but she could still see her friends clearly as they darted in and out of all the trees. But after some time, Fenella found herself growing weary, and her little legs couldn't take it much longer. "Keep up, Fenella," Aslan called out from far ahead. But Aslan's voice quickly faded out as he, Zelda, and Flynn zoomed off further into the forest, leaving Fenella behind, gasping for breath. Fenella decided to rest by a tree and catch her breath. She had done very well to keep up this far, but she had to admit defeat. Fenella just wasn't built in the same way as her friends, so she couldn't do the same things that they could. Fenella was beginning to wonder if she would ever be good enough to do anything to help others. Fenella took a deep breath and slowly sighed. She felt much better now that she had stopped for a break. When she was ready, she would make her way back out of Sleepy Forest and enjoy a leisurely stroll. Fenella preferred to take things slow anyway. It meant that she could take the time to appreciate everything around her more. She would feel much better once she was back in the meadow again. Once Fenella's heartbeat had slowed down, she stood back up and began her journey through Sleepy Forest, back to the meadow. As she plodded along, she gazed at all of the giant trees that soared all the way up to the sky, and listened to the birds singing in the trees and the owls hooting in their nests. She admired the beautiful beds of flowers down on her level and stooped to smell the lilies. They smelt delightful. Fenella closed her eyes and took a deep sniff of the flowers. All of a sudden, she felt something tickle the end of her nose. She opened her eyes and was amused to see a little bumblebee had landed there. "Oh, hello," Fenella greeted the fuzzy little bumblebee. The bumblebee waved its teeny hand at her and tucked its wings in lazily. "I'm sorry if I've disturbed you," the bumblebee responded. "I'm just so tired from buzzing around all day, and your nose looked like the perfect place to stop and rest for a while." Fenella giggled at the bumblebee's unexpected arrival. "It's all right," she replied. "You're very welcome to rest on me if you're tired." The bumblebee thanked Fenella and introduced herself. The bumblebee was called Babs, and Fenella could see that Babs was carrying around 2 big bags of pollen on the back of her legs. "They must be pretty heavy for such a little bug," Fenella thought to herself. "Where do you live?" Fenella asked the weary bug. Babs the bumblebee explained that she lived in a hive with all the rest of her family and friends, not too far away. "Would you like me to give you a lift home?" Fenella offered kindly. "Oh, yes, please," Babs replied gratefully. "I'm so tired. I don't think I could carry all of this pollen back to the hive by myself." Fenella stood up, tall and proud, and asked Babs to guide the way back to her hive. Babs remained perched on the tip of Fenella's nose and led the way for Fenella to take her home. Fenella felt giddy. This was the first time that she had ever given a lift to another creature. She was far too small to carry the animals that the rest of the unicorns regularly taxied around. But Babs the bumblebee was the perfect size for Fenella to carry with ease. Fenella carried Babs all the way home to her hive. "Thank you very much, Fenella," Babs said gratefully as she gazed up at her hive in the tree. "I'm glad I bumped into a unicorn today. You guys are always so helpful." Fenella sighed and bowed her head in embarrassment. "I'm not a very good unicorn," Fenella admitted disappointedly. "I'm too small to carry anyone around or help out. I just get in the way." Babs looked into Fenella's eyes and frowned. "I don't believe that for a second," Babs commented. "You are clearly a very good unicorn. Everybody forgets about creatures like me because we're so small. But we need help, just like the bigger animals. You just helped me out when I was in need. I think that makes you an excellent unicorn, just like all the others." Fenella smiled, and her heart lit up with hope. Perhaps she could be useful after all. Just because she wasn't big enough to help the larger animals of the forest, that didn't mean that she couldn't help out the small ones instead. Babs the bumblebee said goodbye to Fenella and then flew away up to her beehive, carrying her heavy bags of pollen at her sides. When she landed at the door to the hive, she turned around one last time and waved to Fenella before disappearing inside. Fenella paused for a few moments and thought about what Babs had said. If the bigger unicorns were focusing on helping all the large animals, maybe they couldn't see that the small ones needed help too. Maybe Fenella could be the helping hand that the smaller animals needed. Fenella wandered around the forest in search of other small animals. She passed a lion called Leo, but he was far too big for Fenella to carry. She also met a bear named Lana, who had stubbed her toe on a log, but she was too big for Fenella to help out too. Fenella was struggling to find any other animal. They must either be hiding or too tiny to spot. Then, just as Fenella had almost given up hope, she heard a wheezy squeak come from inside a bush. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Fenella called out into the thick bush. She heard the wheezy squeak again and saw the leaves begin to rustle. A little hedgehog emerged from the bottom of the bush, coughing and spluttering, and holding a handkerchief in its hand. "Don't come too close," the hedgehog sniffed. "I've got a cold, and I don't want you to catch it." The hedgehog appeared to be really struggling with his bad cough and runny nose. The hedgehog held his handkerchief and blew his nose as hard as he could. So hard, in fact, that his whole body shuddered with the blustering pressure. This was a perfect opportunity for Fenella to test out her healing powers. She had never been able to heal another animal before, on the account of them all being too large. But surely her magic would be enough to help out this little hedgehog. Fenella closed her eyes and focused. Her rainbow horn began to glitter and shine with magical light. Then the little hedgehog started to magically glow too. "What is happening?" the hedgehog croaked before letting out a long cough. Fenella felt all warm and fuzzy inside. She felt the magic flow through her and out of the tip of her horn. When she opened her eyes, she saw that the hedgehog was standing still in amazement. His nose was no longer blocked and runny, and his voice was no longer croaky and hoarse, with not a single cough in sight. "Wow!" the hedgehog gasped. "You healed my cold? I didn't think that unicorns helped small animals like us." Fenella laughed charmingly. "We help all animals, big or small," she replied. The hedgehog was very grateful for her healing help and offered her his snotty hanky as a gesture of thanks. She politely declined the offer and wandered back off through Sleepy Forest in search of more small creatures to assist. She bumped into a slithering snail who was on his way to a party. "I'm late," the snow-paced snail cried with dismay. "I'm going to miss playing Pass the Parcel." Fenella offered to give the snail a lift on her back to the party, and in next to no time she had carried him across the way to where his friend's birthday celebrations were underway. It was only a very short journey for Fenella, and took her only 2 minutes to walk there. But for the snail, that would have been a very long journey indeed. He would have definitely missed the party if it weren't for Fenella helping him out. She also helped a mouse called Millie carry her shopping home. Fenella was turning into somewhat of a taxi for the smaller animals of the forest, and she loved it. She finally felt like she had a purpose. The other unicorns might be able to help the larger animals of the forest, but Fenella could help the smaller ones that everyone else had forgotten about. They needed help just as much as the big animals. Fenella returned home to the meadow that evening with a new spring in her step. She told her mother all about the animals she had helped that day, and her mother couldn't have been prouder. And when Fenella bumped into her friends Zelda, Flynn, and Aslan, she stopped them in their tracks as they tried to apologize for leaving her behind. If they hadn't gone on ahead, then she never would have discovered what she could do and found her own path. She was grateful to them for giving her the chance to join them. From then on, Fenella's main unicorn duties became helping out the small animals of Sleepy Forest, while the bigger unicorns raced around in a mad dash, assisting the giant animals, as they always did. Fenella took her time tending to the tiny animals that everyone else had forgotten about. Everyone admired Fenella for her forward thinking and care. The small animals were all very grateful for her, and the larger unicorns were all very impressed by her. Fenella didn't let her miniature size hold her back from finding her purpose. She just had to make her own path and get to know her own strengths rather than striving to match others. Fenella, the tiny unicorn, had never felt prouder to be exactly who she was. Even small creatures can make a big impact in their own way. This is Sleeping Beauty by Gillian Rogerson. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far away, there lived a kind-hearted king and queen. They were generous people and loved helping the villagers who lived nearby. The king and queen were always ready to help the fairies of the enchanted forest too. They considered the villagers and fairies to be their very dearest of friends, and the villagers and the fairies felt the same way about the royal couple. The king and queen often held parties to celebrate many events, including their friends' birthdays or weddings, when someone new moved into the area, or for any reason at all that called for a celebration. They held the parties in their palace and would welcome everyone warmly into their home. The day came when there was an extra special reason for a celebration for the king and queen: the birth of their daughter, Briar Rose. She was the light of their lives, and they counted themselves to be very fortunate people indeed. They were so busy looking after the new baby that they didn't have time to think about a party. Their friends in the village and forest were absolutely delighted about the birth of the princess, and with help from the staff at the palace, they arranged for a surprise party to be held for the king and queen. Invitations were sent out across the land, and everyone was told to keep the party a secret, as they wanted it to be a surprise for their kind-hearted king and queen. The day of the surprise party arrived, and as the king and queen knew nothing about it, they took their usual morning stroll around the village as they normally did, and said hello to everyone. Their walk took longer than normal, because the king was holding the new baby in his arms, and everyone wanted to say hello to the little princess. Even though Briar Rose was only a few weeks old, when someone looked at her and smiled, she would gaze softly into their eyes, as though she loved them with all her heart. As they walked through the village, the queen noticed that everyone was wearing their very best clothes that morning, but she didn't say anything. After saying hello to everyone in the village, the king and queen headed into the enchanted forest and said good morning to the fairies who lived there. Like the villagers, the fairies gazed at the baby in wonder, and the little princess looked back at them with love in her eyes. The queen noticed that the fairies were wearing extra twinkly glitter that morning, but she didn't say anything. Once the royal family had said hello to everyone, they headed back towards the palace, completely unaware that it had been transformed inside. The king and queen reached the palace and went inside. They walked into the great hall and came to a sudden stop. Their eyes widened in surprise as they stared at the room in astonishment. Bright banners and glittering balloons hung from the ceiling. Silk ribbons wound around the marble pillars. Tables and chairs were set out across the huge floor and topped with plates and glasses. Each chair was decorated with silk ribbons. A huge dining table had been brought out from the attic and was standing at the back of the room. It was covered in silver dishes that contained a variety of mouth-watering food. In the middle of the table was a big cake. The king and queen shared a confused look. The king said, "Is there a party today? I don't remember organising one. Did you organise this, my love? Is it someone's birthday or anniversary?" The queen replied, "I didn't organise this, and I don't know anyone who's got a celebration coming up. Let's take a closer look at the cake on the table. I think I can see some icing on it." They walked over to the table. Briar Rose was still snuggled cosily in her father's arms. The royal family looked at the cake. The iced words read, "Congratulations on the birth of your daughter." The king frowned, still not sure of what was going on. The queen smiled gently and said, "I think the kind villagers and fairies have organised this for us. I did notice they were dressed in their best clothes and glitter. How very kind and thoughtful of them." At that moment, the queen's maid entered the room. She rushed over to them and declared, "Oh, your majesties, I was supposed to meet you at the front door and lead you into the hall." The queen gave her maid a kind look and said, "I think the cake explains everything. What a lovely surprise for us. Did you help getting everything ready?" The maid nodded and explained how all the staff had helped too. She said, "I do hope it's okay to have a party for you and the princess." The king and queen said it was more than okay. It was the most wonderful of surprises. And they thanked the maid and asked her to give their thanks to the rest of the staff. The baby princess gurgled as though adding her thanks. The maid said, "I'll certainly pass on your thanks. Everyone wanted to welcome Briar Rose, and it was a joy to prepare this celebration for you. The party will begin shortly." The queen said, "In that case, we must get changed into our party clothes immediately so that we're ready to greet our guests." The royal family hastened up the marble steps. They returned minutes later, dressed in their finery. Briar Rose was wearing a delicate lace dress that had been passed down through the family for many years. The royal staff were bustling about in the hall, making sure everything looked perfect. The king and queen took some time to thank everyone and insisted they join in with the celebrations. The doorbell chimed out, and moments later, the first guests arrived bearing gifts for the little princess. The king and queen were touched by their generosity, and their hearts overflowed with love. Each guest gazed upon the princess, who was now in her mother's arms. Briar Rose gazed back at everyone, again with love shining in her little eyes. More and more guests arrived, and the great hall was soon full of chatting people and fluttering fairies. An orchestra of local musicians appeared and began to play soft music. The party was soon in full swing. Guests took seats at the tables. Others helped themselves to the delicious food. Some of the guests started to dance. A while later, the cake was cut, and huge slices were handed out to everyone. The little princess watched it all, a baby smile on her face. Some time later, the king and queen proceeded to open the presents. The villagers and fairies gathered around them. The villagers had created beautiful handmade gifts, including toys, clothes, and soft blankets. The king and queen thanked them over and over again, and proclaimed they had never seen such beautiful items before and would treasure them all. It was time for the fairies to give their gifts. The first fairy, by the name of Twinkletoes, said, "I will teach Briar Rose how to dance, and we will whirl and twirl around the trees in the enchanted forest." The other fairies followed and promised to teach Briar Rose many things, such as singing, painting, and reading. Briar Rose gazed open-eyed at the fairies, as though she was taking in every word they were saying. The king thanked the fairies and said they were very kind. The fairies promised to always be there for the princess, whenever she needed them. The queen said softly, "That is the greatest gift of all. Thank you." Her smile faded a little, and she cast a quick look around the room. She said, "Someone is missing. Where is Sleepy Wings? Did she receive an invitation?" The other fairies nodded and said Sleepy Wings had told them she was looking forward to the party. The fairies had reminded her about it just before they had set off towards the palace. Twinkletoes said fondly, "She's probably fallen asleep somewhere. You know how much she loves sleeping. Sometimes I think she could sleep for 100 years. I'm sure she'll turn up soon. She won't want to miss this party." The queen nodded, but a look of concern remained on her face. She handed the baby princess to her husband and said she would check on the missing fairy. She'd take her some cake too, in case there was none left later. The queen quickly collected a slice of cake and wrapped it carefully in a cotton napkin. The queen left the palace and headed towards the enchanted forest. She entered the forest and walked along the sun-dappled path towards the fairy house where Sleepy Wings lived. When she arrived, the queen found the little fairy snoozing peacefully in a hammock strung between two bushes. Sleepy Wings looked so very peaceful in her slumber that the queen didn't want to wake her up. She placed the cake on the doorstep of the fairy house and began to walk away. Sleepy Wings stirred in her hammock and opened her eyes. She smiled sleepily at the queen and said hello. The queen said, "I hope I haven't disturbed you. I was leaving some cake on your doorstep. It's from the party celebrations at the palace. I'm going back there now. Do you want to come with me?" Sleepy Wings yawned and said she would do that. She apologized for being late. She had decided to take a short nap before the party and had fallen fast asleep. The Queen and Sleepy Wings headed to the palace and went inside. Sleepy Wings flew over to the princess and said, "I will bestow upon you a peaceful sleep for every night of your life." The king chuckled and said their daughter was already sleeping well throughout the night, and he'd started to call her Sleeping Beauty. Sleepy Wings said, "That is good news, especially for such a young baby. If that ever changes, Briar-Rose can visit me in the forest, and I will help her." The party continued throughout the day and into the night. The memory of the wonderful surprise party stayed with the royal family and their guests for a long time and was often spoken about fondly. The years passed by and Briar-Rose grew older. Just like her parents, she loved spending time with the villagers and offered her help whenever she could. She also loved being with the fairies in the enchanted forest, playing games and dancing with them. She attended the local school and made many friends there. Briar-Rose continued to sleep peacefully every night, just like she had as a baby. But there came a time when that changed. It started on a particularly busy day for the princess. Briar-Rose had been out of the palace all day long. After finishing school for the day, she had stopped at the village and helped people with one thing and another, and then she'd visited the fairies and danced and sang with them for a while. When she'd returned to the palace, she had taken dinner with her family and talked about their day. But when Briar-Rose went to bed that night, her mind was full of busy thoughts that just wouldn't settle down. She thought about the new dances she had learned with the fairies and wondered if she was doing them right. She thought about the farmers in the village and if it was time to help them with the apple harvest yet. She thought about her schoolwork and wondered if she would ever get the hang of fractions. Perhaps she could ask her friend Samuel if he could help her with that. Briar-Rose stared at the ceiling as the thoughts continued to tumble over and over through her mind. Eventually, she drifted off to sleep. But the same thing happened the next night, and the night after that. It was like her thoughts were queuing up in her mind, just waiting for her to lie down in bed at night. And as soon as that happened, the thoughts would jump into her head wanting her attention. Her parents noticed their daughter yawning throughout the day and asked her what was wrong. When Briar-Rose told them about her sleeping issues, her mother said, "Why don't you visit Sleepy Wings? Her gift to you when you were born was a peaceful night's sleep. You didn't need it at the time, but it seems you do now." Briar-Rose said she would visit Sleepy Wings straight away. She knew where the fairy lived, but hadn't spoken to her much, because Sleepy Wings was often asleep when Briar-Rose visited the enchanted forest. The princess left the palace and headed towards the forest. Her head became full of thoughts along the way. Briar-Rose was so absorbed in what was going on in her head that she almost walked straight past Sleepy Wings, who was awake and sitting in a little chair outside her house. Sleepy Wings called out, "Hey there, Briar Rose. Be careful where you're going. You're about to bump into a tree." Briar Rose stopped walking and shook her head at the tree she'd almost bumped into. She walked over to Briar Rose and let out a soft sigh. "Hello, Sleepy Wings. Thank you for the warning. I was too busy thinking thoughts to watch where I was going." Sleepy Wings gave the princess a long look and said, "Are those thoughts keeping you up at night too?" Briar Rose nodded and said she didn't know how to get rid of them, and the more she thought about them, the more thoughts floated into her head. Sleepy Wings nodded in understanding and said it happened to many people, but luckily, Sleepy Wings knew how to get rid of such troublesome thoughts. "You do?" the princess asked. "How?" Sleepy Wings got up from her chair and said it would be easier to show Briar Rose rather than tell her. "Follow me," the fairy said. "We'll start by going for a walk through the forest. Try not to bump into any trees." She grinned at Briar Rose. Briar Rose grinned back and said she would try her best not to. She had many questions for the fairy concerning her never-ending thoughts, but before she could ask even one, the fairy asked her a question. "Briar Rose, can you tell me what you see as we walk along?" Briar Rose was surprised at the question, but she took a look at her surroundings and said she could see the trees and the sky and the grass. "Tell me more," the fairy said. "Are the trees all the same? And what about the sky? Are there any clouds up there?" The princess slowed her steps and took a longer look. She told the fairy that some of the trees reached towards the sky, and some had low branches that swept the ground. The leaves were all different shades of green. Some were like ripened apples, and some were a pale, delicate green, like the eyes of Emerald, the singing fairy. The princess stopped walking and gazed at the sky. She said there were a lot of fluffy clouds, and one of them looked like a dragon with smoke curling out of its mouth. She smiled and said, "That one next to the dragon looks like a sheep jumping over a horse. Oh, look over there. That cloud is shaped like my mother's favourite hat." Briar Rose gazed at the sky some more, her smile soft and relaxed. When she looked back at the fairy, Sleepy Wings was smiling too. Sleepy Wings suggested they carry on walking and go towards the stream up ahead. She asked Briar Rose to keep looking closely at what was around them. The fairy added, "Can you tell me what you hear and smell too?" Briar Rose nodded, not sure why Sleepy Wings was asking her that. As they continued on their walk, Briar Rose took her time and really looked at the trees, the flowers, and the animals who lived in the forest. She noticed the sun slanting through the branches and moving across the grass in a mesmerizing dance. she heard the soft buzz of a bumblebee as it nuzzled into the velvety petals of a ruby red rose. The bee's buzzing mingled with the sweet songs coming from the birds in the trees. Briar Rose gently inhaled the relaxing scent of lavender plants and trailed her fingers through patches of long grass. The princess became more and more relaxed as she strolled through the forest. She let out a soft sigh of happiness. They walked on, and Briar Rose soon heard the soothing babble of the stream as it tumbled over the rocks. It was like music, and it blended perfectly with the other sounds coming from the forest, like nature's lullaby. The fairy and the princess stopped at the side of the stream and watched it flow gently around shiny rocks. Briar Rose noticed golden fish swimming leisurely through the water. She gazed at them as they swam downstream. She saw frogs lying on their backs on sun-warmed rocks at the side of the stream. Their hands were behind their heads, and they were gazing softly at the sky. Briar Rose relaxed more and more as she absorbed the soothing scene. Sleepy Wings fluttered over to a large rock and invited Briar Rose to join her. Briar Rose sat down next to the fairy and placed her hands on the rock, noticing how smooth and warm it was. Sleepy Wings looked at the slow-flowing water, a peaceful smile on her face. She began to take some deep, relaxing breaths. Briar Rose instinctively copied the fairy and took some deep breaths too. It was so very relaxing, sitting there on the warm rock and doing nothing except watching the stream flow by. Sleepy Wings turned to Briar Rose and asked how she was feeling. Briar Rose replied, "Very relaxed and happy. All those thoughts I had earlier have gone." She smiled at the fairy. "Have you used magic on me?" The fairy shook her head and said, "The magic is within you and has always been there. It's a matter of quietening your mind. You can still the thoughts in your head at any time by slowing down and really looking at what's around you. Taking long, slow breaths helps too. You can also count your breaths if you want to. If you take time during your day to quieten your mind, you will fall asleep more easily at night." "Really?" Briar Rose asked. "Is it really that easy?" With the softest look in her eyes, Sleepy Wings replied, "It works for me, and others too. It helps if you practice quietening several times throughout the day. Sometimes even a minute of slowing down and silently counting your breaths will help. Why don't you try that now?" Briar Rose focused softly on the stream and took some long, deep breaths and silently counted them. 1, breathing in. 2, breathing out. 3, breathing in. 4, breathing out. 5, breathing in. 6, breathing out. Briar Rose smiled at the fairy and said that had helped, and she felt even more relaxed. The princess and the fairy stayed a little while longer on the warm rock, not talking, just looking at the slowly moving river. After a while, Sleepy Wings started to yawn. Briar Rose yawned too and said she should be getting back to the palace. Sleepy Wings gave her a sleepy nod and said, "I'd better get back to my home too, but I'm too tired to walk and I'm too tired to fly." The kind princess said, "You can sit on my shoulder and I'll carry you home." Sleepy Wings was touched by her thoughtfulness and said thank you. The princess lowered her shoulder and the sleepy fairy climbed onto it. She snuggled up closer to the princess and closed her eyes. Briar Rose stood up and walked away from the stream. She made her way through the forest, careful not to disturb the fairy on her shoulder, who was now fast asleep. On the way through the forest, Briar Rose looked closely at her surroundings and saw many things she'd never noticed before. She kept practicing her deep breathing, and a feeling of peacefulness flowed through her. It wasn't long before Briar Rose reached Sleepy Wings' fairy house. She carefully scooped the snoozing fairy off her shoulder and placed her snugly into her hammock. She tucked a little blanket around the fairy, whispered, "Thank you," and then continued on her way. By the time Briar Rose reached the palace, she felt very relaxed and happy. She also felt very tired and told her parents she was going to have an early night. She gave them a sleepy wave and headed to her room. Very soon, Briar Rose was snuggled up in her cozy bed, feeling all warm and peaceful. She remembered Sleepy Wings' words and silently counted her breaths and slowly breathed in and out. Briar Rose gently drifted into a deep, deep sleep. Dinosaurs in the Castle by Gillian Rogerson. It was the first day of the school holidays, and as soon as Katie woke up, she had a feeling it was going to be a special day. Her little brother Bobby ran into the room and climbed onto her bed. He grinned up at her and moved his face closer until their noses were touching. Bobby said, "What are we going to do today? I hope we're going to have lots of fun. When are you getting up? I've been up for ages." Katie smiled at her little brother. She could tell by the look in his eyes that he had many more questions to ask her, so she gave him a quick cuddle and said they should get dressed, go downstairs, and see if their mum had made any plans for the day. In a flash, Bobby leapt off her bed and raced out of the room. Once the children were dressed, they went downstairs and into the kitchen. Their mum was singing along to a song on the radio and gave them a cheery good morning. Breakfast was quickly prepared and eaten. Katie asked what they were going to do that day. There was a twinkle in Mum's eyes as she said, "We're going to a very special place this morning, somewhere we've never been to before. I saw it in town last week and knew it was the perfect place to take you both. As soon as you've brushed your teeth, we'll set off." The children were ready in record time and waited at the front door for their mother. Bobby talked non-stop about where they could be going. He was convinced it would be somewhere magical. The family left the house and walked into town. The sun was shining brightly and flowers bloomed in front gardens. They came to a stop outside a new shop that Katie had never seen before. The children peered closer at the items displayed in the shop window. Brightly coloured toys nestled in layers of blue, green and purple silk. Sparkling sequins lay scattered on the smooth material. Glittering butterflies and unicorns had been painted on the glass window, and they twinkled in the light of the sun. Katie said it looked like a toy shop. Bobby said it looked like a magic shop. Their mother said, "Perhaps it's a bit of both. Let's go inside." She opened the door and a tinkling bell sounded out. They stepped into the shop, and to the children it seemed like they had stepped into another world. There were toys everywhere, lined up on shelves, overflowing from boxes, laid out on large rugs waiting for children to play with them. The shop walls were painted in sparkling shades of blue, green and purple, which added to the magical feel of the shop. It wasn't like any shop Katie had seen before. There was something different about it, but she couldn't think what that was. Before she could ask their mother what kind of a shop it was, a woman appeared before them. She had long, rainbow-coloured hair that lay in a plait over her shoulder. She was wearing a flowing dress made out of blue, green and purple silk. Glimmering sequins decorated the hem and the sleeves of the beautiful dress. There was a light dusting of glitter on her cheeks, and the sparkle that came from it matched the soft twinkle in her eyes. She welcomed the family warmly and said her name was Serena Sparkles. Bobby stared at Serena with his little mouth hanging open. Katie thought Serena looked like a human version of a unicorn and couldn't stop looking at her either. Their mum said hello to Serena and said, "Could you tell my children what kind of a shop this is, please?" Serena smiled at the children and said, "It's a toy library. You can choose a toy and take it home to play with. And when you're ready for a new toy, bring it back and swap it for another." Bobby was suddenly full of questions. Could they borrow any toy at all? And could they take it home, really, and play with it for as long as they wanted? What if he wanted to play with something for days and days, or weeks and weeks? Serena answered all his questions and asked the children if they'd like to look around the shop and pick a toy to take home. The children nodded eagerly. Serena spoke to their mother and asked if she'd like to sit for a while and have a coffee whilst the children made their choices. She pointed to a table by the window where a pot of hot coffee lay waiting. At the side of the pot was a selection of books. No one in the family had noticed the table when they'd entered the shop, and the children wondered if Serena was magic. Their mother said she would love to and thanked Serena. She told her children to take their time, and if they needed her help, just call out. The children said they would. Katie and Bobby walked away with Serena to browse the many toys that filled the shop. Bobby looked up at Serena and asked if she was magic. She smiled at the little boy and said, "Everyone has magic inside them, even if they don't know it yet." She led them over to some shelves that were full of books and board games. She told them to take their time looking at the toys. Katie loved board games and books. She looked closer at the items on display. Bobby had already decided he didn't want any of them and started to look at the tables next to the shelves. Some of the tables were full of sand and had digging tools too. Other tables had modelling clay on them with moulds in the shape of animals and vehicles. Painting tables were set up with brushes, paints, and lots of paper. Serena noticed where Bobby was looking and said he could play with something on the tables whilst he waited for his sister to make a decision. Bobby wandered around the tables. They all looked fun, but he didn't stop to play with any of them. He kept looking around, searching for something else. After a good look at the board games and books, Katie decided she didn't want to borrow any of them just yet, and continued to look around the marvellous shop. She soon found something wonderful. So did her little brother. Katie found a beautiful wooden castle that had a drawbridge. She told Serena she'd been learning about castles at school and would love to borrow it. Bobby had found a tub of dinosaurs. He grinned in delight, knelt at the side of the tub and started to play with the toys. He told Serena he loved playing with dinosaurs, and could he take them home, please? Serena said of course. She picked up the castle and dinosaur tub to get them ready for the children to take away. The children ran back to their mother. They told her what they'd chosen and asked if they could play with the toys as soon as they got home. Their mother said yes and put down the book she was reading. Serena came over to the family. She was carrying 2 sparkling blue bags. Serena told the children's mother she could borrow the book she'd just been reading and take that home too. Katie and Bobby insisted on carrying the bags and were surprised to discover how light they were. The family thanked Serena and headed home. As soon as they arrived back at their house, Katie and Bobby took their toys into the living room. Their mother settled herself in the armchair next to the window and continued reading her book. Bobby lined the dinosaurs up and began talking to them. Katy got a green rug from her bedroom and put it underneath the castle so that it looked like grass. She placed a blue scarf around the edge of the rug and told Bobby it was a moat full of water. She lowered the drawbridge across the water. She said, "I wish I could go inside the castle." Bobby said, "I wish my dinosaurs could talk to me." As soon as the words left their lips, blue, green, and purple sparkles appeared in the air before them. The sparkles landed on the castle and dinosaurs. The children watched in amazement as the castle grew and grew and grew. Their living room disappeared, and they were outside in a large field. They gazed in wonder at the enormous castle in front of them. The sun was warm on their faces, and a warm breeze drifted over them. "What just happened?" Katy asked. "Magic," Bobby replied matter-of-factly. "Where did my dinosaurs go? They were right next to me." The children looked left and right, but couldn't see the dinosaurs. Bobby said, "They must be inside the castle. We have to find them." He raced towards the drawbridge and ran over it. "Wait for me," Katy called out. She ran after her brother. They went through the large door of the castle and stopped inside a huge hall. Long tables were laid out in the hall, and paintings of kings and queens hung from the walls. It was a magnificent sight, but the children had all their attention on something else. At the far side of the room was a dinosaur dressed in a red tunic and a pair of yellow trousers. It was a T-Rex, and she was dancing and singing. Bobby said, "That's one of my dinosaurs. Let's talk to her." He ran over to the singing animal, and his sister followed him. When the T-Rex saw the children, she stopped singing and waved at them. She said, "Hi there. Isn't this a lovely castle? I know your names because I heard you talking earlier. I'm Tina. Would you like to see me juggle?" Katy and Bobby had never seen a real dinosaur before and stared at her without saying a word. Tina picked up some cloth balls and began to juggle with them. She was very good and even managed to juggle with her eyes closed. The children soon got over their surprise at seeing a talking dinosaur, and when Tina asked if they wanted to juggle too, they said yes straight away. Katy and Bobby were good at juggling and had a wonderful time with Tina the T-Rex. She even showed them some of her dance moves. Bobby asked if the castle was a magic one. Tina nodded and said anything could happen inside the castle. She waved her hands in the air and 3 pineapples and 6 lemons appeared. She began to juggle with them. She told them the other dinosaurs were somewhere in the castle, but she didn't know where they were or what they were doing. Bobby wanted to find the other dinosaurs, so they said goodbye to Tina and started to explore the many rooms in the castle. The children entered the kitchen next and saw a stegosaurus wearing a cooking apron. A chef's hat was perched on his large head. The dinosaur was standing in front of a big mixing bowl. He waved when he saw the children and asked if they could help him with something. Katy and Bobby moved closer and asked how they could help. The Stegosaurus pointed to the jars behind him and said he needed flour. Katy passed a flour jar to him and watched as the big dinosaur poured all the flour into the bowl. He gave it a good stir and then asked the children to stir it also. Bobby asked what he was making. The Stegosaurus said, "A cake. I love cake. Do you like it too?" The children nodded, and at that very moment their tummies rumbled. The dinosaur chuckled and said it sounded like they could do with some cake straight away. The Stegosaurus looked at the bowl and said, "Abracadabra." A cloud of flour floated up from the bowl. The flour slowly vanished, and so did the bowl. In its place was a huge cake topped with pale pink icing and strawberries. The dinosaur cut 3 slices of cake and put them onto plates. The cake was in rainbow-coloured layers, and each layer tasted of different fruit. The cake was delicious, and because it had been made by a dinosaur, it tasted even more special to the children. When they'd finished the cake, the children said thank you to the Stegosaurus and continued exploring the castle. They stopped at the bottom of some stone steps. There was a peculiar rumbling noise coming from somewhere at the top of them. The children decided to investigate the noise to see where it was coming from. As they walked up the stairs, the noise grew louder, and Bobby said it sounded like thunder. They followed the rumbles and went inside a large bedroom. In the middle of the room was a huge bed, and inside the bed covers was a sleeping Triceratops who was snoring so loudly that it made the floor of the bedroom shake. Seeing the snoozing dinosaur made the children feel tired too, and they yawned. Katy said they should carry on exploring, because if they stayed any longer inside the bedroom, she would fall asleep too. Bobby whispered, "I wonder what dinosaurs dream about." Like magic, a huge cloud-shaped bubble appeared over the dinosaur. Inside the bubble was a moving picture, and it showed the Triceratops ballet dancing across a stage. He pointed one foot high into the air and spun around on the other. The audience who were watching him clapped their hands enthusiastically, and the Triceratops took a bow. Katy smiled and said, "We know what the dinosaur is dreaming about. What a lovely dream." They left the snoring Triceratops to his ballet dream and continued on their way. As they walked along the hall, a couple of small bubbles floated toward them. Bobby held his hand out, and the bubbles popped lightly against his fingers. More bubbles floated out of a room ahead of them, and the children walked towards it to see where the bubbles were coming from. They came to a bathroom where a diplodocus was running a bath. It was a huge bath, and it was full of shimmering bubbles. A pink shower cap was on the dinosaur's head. She smiled at the children and said hello. She told them her name was Daphne and asked if they liked the bobbing bubbles in the bath. The children nodded. Daphne the diplodocus said, "These are magic bubbles. Would you like to see what they can do?" The children nodded again. Daphne scooped up a handful of the bubbles and blew them towards the children. 2 of the bubbles grew bigger and bigger until they were the same size as Katie. Daphne said if the children stepped into the bubbles, they could tell it where they wanted to go, and the bubbles would carry them there. Katie asked Bobby where he wanted to go next. He didn't know, so she suggested they travel to the cellar because there could be secret tunnels down there to explore. Bobby liked the idea of that and said he hoped there would be another dinosaur in the cellar too. The children stepped into the bubbles and Katie asked to be taken to the cellar. They waved goodbye to Daphne and were carried smoothly out of the room, down the steps and over to a wall. A secret door in the wall opened, and the children were taken through it and down more steps. Lanterns fixed to the wall lit up their way. The magical bubbles took the children into a huge cellar and came to a stop in the middle of it. The children stepped out of the bubbles. Bobby placed his finger on the outside of his bubble and made it pop. Tiny specks of blue, green, and purple glitter fluttered free from the popped bubble. They twinkled for a moment and then disappeared. Katie popped her bubble too, and the children watched the glitter sparkle and twinkle before slowly disappearing. The children looked around and saw 5 tunnels leading off in different directions. Bobby wanted to explore them and asked which one they should go through. A deep voice boomed out, "I've walked through 4 of them so far, and can tell you what's on the end of them." A pterodactyl walked out of a tunnel and smiled at the children. He was dressed in a beige-coloured shirt and matching shorts. Hiking boots were on his feet. The dinosaur was holding a map in one winged hand and a compass in the other. He walked over to the children and told them his name was Terry. Bobby gazed at the dinosaur in admiration. Katie introduced herself and her brother. She asked which tunnels Terry had explored. Terry the pterodactyl put his map and compass away in one of the many pockets on his shirt and pointed to the various tunnels. He explained how one led to a beach and the other to a secret cave that was full of sparkling gems. The other 2 were longer, and one had taken him to an underground city and the other to a hidden garden. The dinosaur pointed to the 5th tunnel and said, "I haven't explored that one yet. Would you like to come with me?" Katie and Bobby said they would love to explore the tunnel with Terry. The dinosaur said they would need lights to help them through the tunnel. He clicked his claws, and 2 floating lanterns appeared in front of the children. Katy and Bobby took hold of them and followed Terry through the last unexplored tunnel. Katy and Bobby could feel warm, fresh air on their faces, and up ahead they saw sunlight streaming through the end of the tunnel. They soon reached the end and walked out of the tunnel. The children and the dinosaur were on top of a mountain. They looked out over a vibrant green forest that lay below them. On a hill in the distance was the castle they had been inside just minutes before. The dinosaur clicked his claws, and the lanterns vanished from the children's hands. Katy said, "How did we get up here? The tunnel was only a short one." Terry the pterodactyl smiled at them and said their imaginations could take them anywhere. Just when the children didn't think their day could get any more magical, Terry said, "Would you like a flight back to the castle? There's plenty of room on my back." Bobby and Katy nodded eagerly. The pterodactyl lowered his back, and the children climbed on. Safety belts appeared and wrapped themselves around the children. Terry opened his wings wide and took to the sky. The children grinned at each other in utter joy. The dinosaur swooped over the trees and towards the castle. Warm air flowed over the children as they were taken on their magical dinosaur ride. They reached the castle, and Terry came to a smooth landing at the side of the drawbridge. The children hopped off his back and thanked him for the lift. Terry said it was a pleasure, and he hoped they would meet again soon. He said goodbye and flew away. Bobby watched the pterodactyl as he flew further and further away. Then he let out a big yawn and said talking to dinosaurs had made him tired. He asked Katy if they could go home because he needed a rest before they had any more adventures. Katy didn't know how to make them return home, but as she looked at the huge castle in front of them, a thought came to her, and she said, "Thank you, castle. Thank you, dinosaurs. It's time for us to go home now." The castle shone brightly for a moment, and then it shrank back to its original size. The children were back in their living room and standing on the green rug. The tub of dinosaurs appeared at the side of Bobby's feet. Bobby put his little hand in Katy's and said, "That was a great adventure. I knew that shop was a magical one. Can we go back to it another day?" Katy nodded and smiled fondly at her little brother. Bobby sat down on the carpet and began to play with the dinosaurs. Their mother looked up from the book she was reading and smiled at the children. She asked if they would like something to eat. Katy said she would like something and offered to help her mum in the kitchen. She turned to her brother and asked if he wanted something too. but Bobby was asleep on the carpet, with some of the dinosaurs cuddled in his arms. There was a gentle smile on his face, and Katy wondered if he was dreaming about the dinosaurs in the castle. She took a cover off the sofa and gently tucked it around the sleeping boy. Katy went into the kitchen with her mum and asked when they could go back to the toy library. Her mum said they could go back any time they wanted to. Katy smiled and thought about the wonderful adventures that lay ahead for her and her little brother.